Thank you, Zizi, and thank you to the organizers. It's been really a pleasure to be here. This is a very unusual conference for me as a person who comes from media studies. And so I actually wanted to begin to remind you that media studies is a very interdisciplinary field, and that, so I'll start with a quote from Doug Adams, who is the author of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, who provides us with a nice quote to think about technology and its role in our lives. He says that any technology that was introduced into your life before you were 18 is expected and unremarkable and regular part of life. Any technology that was introduced during the time that you were 18 to 35 is new and exciting, and you can probably get a career in it. Any technology that was introduced into your life after you were the age of 35 is strange and unusual and against the natural order of things. So I've been interested in my work in looking at this generational difference that happens between parents and young people and how social media make a difference in their lives, as Catherine had mentioned, as we have these 20th century adults who are parenting 21st century children. And one of the things that I noticed when I was doing my research was that I was able to do a lot of interviews. I do ethnographic work and in-depth interviewing. I was able to do a lot of interviews with parents using some of Larry Steinberg's work to look at issues of how parents interact with young people. But I had great difficulty trying to interview families who were from what Catherine talked about as the forgotten half. And so this year, what I've been doing is spending some time in a high school that serves at-risk young people, trying to understand the cultures that are part of their lives and how social media fits into those lives and makes connections for them with their parents as well as peer groups and other forms of support. So the person that you see on the slide here is a young man that we'll call Abraham, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about him. He's a young man who was raised by his grandmother in Ethiopia, and then his parents had split, his mother had left, and his father had come to the United States. So when he started school in Ethiopia, his grandmother eventually decided that it would be a good opportunity for him to move to the United States so that he could pursue education here. So he then moved to the US and has lived with his father now for the past 8 years. And one of the things that I have observed, being with Abraham for the last couple of years, actually I've known him for 2 years now, is that he has never received a text from his father. He has no references to his father on his Facebook page, and he has never been involved. I've never met his father, actually. His father has never come to any of his after-school events, which is sort of interesting and sad. But yet Abraham is a young man who's able to be a part of a very vibrant community and has a kind of a resilience that's been interesting to me, and it's the reason why I wanted to share his story with you today as we were talking. Let's see here. So today what I wanted to do was to look at a couple of things to bring my perspective from media studies to our problems today in terms of looking at social media and social networks. First of all, I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the insights from the field of media studies that are looking at the affordances of social media and new media practices, or what new media make possible for us in terms of our practices. Secondly, looking at some of the studies of social media in young adults that are taking place now. And then looking also at what's missing from those studies, and then looking at an intervention case study, I guess we could call it, which is a project that I've been involved in with this after-school group called Digital Storytelling, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. And then finally look at some future areas for research that I think might be interesting. A number of people within media studies are very interested in the role that media play in society and in social change. And so there are a number of theories that have been emerging that are trying to look at what new media make possible that wasn't possible before. One of the things that I think is particularly interesting and relevant for you today is the issue of looking at media as practice. In other words, what do people go to media to do? What do they go there for? So Nick Kodry has come up with some typology to look at this issue. And he talks about how new media make it possible for us to be engaged in searching and search enabling, showing and being shown, presencing, archiving, commentary, and continuous connectivity. That these are all things that have been possible in the past, but that the new media they emphasize as something that we're able to do as we are involved in interactions with one another and with information. So we'll come back to that in just a minute. This is my book that I published called The Parent App, Understanding Families in a Digital Age, in which I was trying to understand some of the generational tensions. And basically some of the issues that came out in the book were some issues that I borrowed some terms such as the digital trail. One of the sources of tension among young people and parents is this issue of how young people leave behind evidence of themselves or presencing, or how they are being present with their peers online and what kinds of effects that can have in other aspects of their lives. That can be a source of tension between parents and young people because they see that quite differently. Also the digital tether, which is something that relates to how parents connect with young people and what they expect from their young people as they're making those connections, in terms of how young people feel that some parents have decided that it's important to have a code word, for instance, so that if they really want the young person to pick up the phone, they'll have a code that says, you need to answer the phone right now. The digital tether also works in relation to those of us who are in college, and we see now that parents, the phenomenon of helicopter parenting becomes an issue in relation to mobile phones, so that I've had students who will walk out of class and will receive a text from their parents right after the class saying, how did you do on your test? So there's much more of that kind of tethering that is possible today that challenges some aspects of young adulthood and that parent-child relationship. And there are also new rules. For instance, the one that I have here is that sometimes I've heard grandparents talk about how difficult it is to speak with their grandchildren or to be able to get in touch with them. And so they've gotten the advice that it's important to text before calling. So if you want to be able to reach your grandchild, you need to make sure that you make an appointment by texting before calling. So there are different kinds of rules that apply that we're all kind of trying to work out right now. In the area of young adult studies, there isn't much in my field, just as is true in a number of your fields that we've heard about in the last day. But basically within media studies, the way that we have approached issues related to social media and young people are in two categories. Looking at research from the perspective of how we have to take a protectionist approach toward young people, or how we might look at an emancipatory perspective, and what difference that would make in terms of looking at media in the lives of young people. Basically, this breaks down into, are we going to emphasize risk, or are we going to look at opportunity? On the risk side, there are studies such as the one by Rizvani that looks at how social media use can exacerbate mental health problems among young adults, because when young people are feeling depressed, they may go onto Facebook and find that there's reinforcement for other people, the feeling that other people have lives that are more exciting than their life, or are better put together than their life. Another study that some of you may be familiar with is by Sherry Turkle from MIT, who looked at how social network sites and other forms of digital media may be making our relationships less intimate, because we feel like we are always constantly available and there's a potential for intimacy, but yet we don't necessarily always take advantage of that. On the opportunity side, there are a number of studies within my field that have been looking at social media and how they play a role in political socialization, and looking also at the fact that most young adults today get their news from social media. Also, we know some things about schooling, that, for instance, social media use does not detract from or improve GPA and academic performance. And then specifically in the area that I've been interested in the past year, there are some research looking at immigrant young adults and how they are able to utilize social media to keep in touch with families in their home country of origin. But there are a number of things that are missing from this agenda as well. First of all, of course, the research of social media use among young adults who are not in college or college-bound is missing. We're missing studies of young parents employed full-time or part-time schooling and how social media are part of their lives. We haven't looked yet at unmarried working mothers and unmarried working men with limited education and varied workforce experiences. What's also missing, I think, from a theoretical perspective, is how can we draw connections between what happens on social media in relation to social media storytelling and identity formation, and the role of narrative in enhancing well-being. And I think that's something that's relevant for this group and has come up in discussion yesterday, and particularly make some connections with some of the things that Deborah Rivas-Drake was talking about yesterday in relation to identity formation among communities. So we know about searching, and we've talked about that quite a bit here at the conference so far, how we can think about social media as a way of receiving information. But how might the presencing, archiving, and the showing or being shown practices of media be mobilized in interventions? So we do know that young people use social media to tell stories about themselves. And this is actually a screenshot from Abraham's Facebook page. And I don't think you can read it, but it actually, the letters spell out prom. And so this was, they had their prom at their high school a couple of weeks ago. And several of them decided that one of them would ask his girlfriend to the prom and create a video about it. And so they created this little 3-minute video, and they had this poster that said prom with a question mark, and they marched into the classroom and had this very cute video that basically went viral within their high school. So, and this is a story, an example of using social media to tell a story about who they are as young people. So the question then I wanted to raise is, how might we help young adults to create what we might call anchoring narratives that can help them to understand themselves as resilient, that can remind them of their resilience when times get tough, and that they can share with others in their social networks who can affirm their resilience. And so one of the things that we had been exploring, I've been doing some work with a doctoral student in social work who's interested in the role of narrative in relation to healing from trauma. And so we've been looking at digital storytelling, which is a way of creating video using very low-tech tools like iMovie, photos, and the ability to create a script so that you can help people to tell their own story in their own words. So I wanted to show you one of these, which is a story. It's not actually Abraham's story because his has some identifying information, but it's one of his friends. So I wanted to show you this as an example of what a young person had created when he was invited to tell his story about what his experience was growing up, and then how he is moving forward from here. Let's see if this will work. Will it work? Okay. Okay. Okay, well, we'll move on. Sorry. So I can show that to you at another time if you want. I have it on my computer as well. But the idea behind the stories is that it can enable a young person to tell a story within about a 2 or 3 minute period that gives them an opportunity to share it then among their peers or among whatever community they'd like. And the idea is that it's their story, so they're able to make selections about which context they'd like to share it. Their context initially was that last week was the high school's art show, and so they were able to show it as part of the art show, and were able to receive some affirmation among their teachers and among their school communities for the story of the experiences that they had gone through when they were young people, and then also how they had been able to take those stories of difficulty and create from that a way of thinking of themselves as people who are resilient and able to face challenges and move on from those and see those challenges as issues that make them stronger as individuals. So let's see here if I can move on. So social media practices and intervention. The reason that I wanted to highlight digital storytelling is that it does have the aspect of presencing, and that it can enable people to claim a resilient identity, that social media, because it is about showing and being shown, when you are able to encourage a young person to produce their own narrative, they can use that as a way to educate and inspire others in their community so that their own story of difficulty becomes a story that can be one that is encouraging for other people. And then third, it is a way of archiving, of helping young people to make a record that documents their own resilience at one period of time in their life that they may be able to take with them from high school into the next phase of their life. So young adults are assembling narratives of themselves in digital platforms and sharing them with others, as we know, through Facebook, YouTube, Tumblr, and other platforms. And when others are given positive comments to those narratives that they create, we know that that enhances the legitimacy of the story that the individual tells to themselves and to others. That's part of the warranting principle that's been looked at in my field. And also we know that those from collectivist cultures hail from rich oral traditions and infrequently access mental health services, which makes storytelling an underexplored resource. So I'm hoping that future research can look at the role of storytelling in creating self-identity and enhancing well-being, and specifically looking at how this may be a resource among the forgotten half as identified by the William T. Grant Foundation, and exploring connections between individual and collective storytelling afforded in online platforms and that may provide an avenue for enhanced well-being. So the question that I wanted to leave us with is, how can the formal, informal, offline, and online social networks in which young people live be mobilized to provide the support that students like Abraham need to achieve what he wants to achieve, whether that's in college or in other settings as a young adult? So, thank you. Thank you.
Would it be possible to see if we can pull up Lynn's clip and maybe show it if there's time at the end of the panel, or try that? Okay, thank you. And our final speaker for this panel will be Dr. Bonnie Felsher, who is a professor in the Division of Adolescent Medicine Department of Pediatrics with the University of California, San Francisco. She is particularly interested in how an understanding of adolescent and young adult health-related decision-making can lead to improved prevention and intervention programs. She has led or co-led a number of grants concerning adolescent risk behavior and serves as a consultant to a number of community-based adolescent health promotion programs, and has been an active member on several national campaigns to understand and reduce adolescent risk behavior, and she will be speaking specifically on marketing and media.